Yeah, so basically, I suppose, Janine, really the 19th century, um, fishing was one of the main activities in Shetland. It was the main industry. And so from May to August, men would be away at sea, basically, at fishing stations dotted around Shetland, which were as close as they could get to the deep sea fishing grounds. In Shetland, that's called the Haff, which is an Old Norse word meaning basically deep sea. And the men would go there during the week. The boats would be there. They would go off fishing 2 or 3 times a week, and the women would be at home running the croft. And so that's quite interesting from a gender split point of view in terms of work, because the women did a lot of work that traditionally would be viewed as men's work. So quite often they would be running the crofts in the men's absence, doing all the things that you need to do to run a business, a small business. They were tenant crofter fisher people, fishermen, and so the patch of land they rented from the local landowner, and traditionally the landowner required the men to fish for them or a nominated merchant or factor. So the men would be away, possibly, depending where they were fishing from, come back at weekends and sharing the work excuse me, at the weekend. You'll notice around Shetland you'll come across lots of ruins of crofts, and they're nowhere near a road. They're miles from a road. And that's because roads didn't come to Shetland until the 1840s as part of famine relief, because there used to be a lot of famine in Shetland, and there's a particularly bad famine in the 1800s. And so the government had this thing called famine relief, and as part of that they came up with the idea of building a road network in Shetland, the trunk roads really, the main roads, and people would work on those roads and then get famine relief. So today you look at the crofts and think, well, how do people get there? Well, they got there by boat, because the boat was the car. Shetland being an archipelago of some 100 islands, I think about 16 are inhabited today, people needed to have a small boat. So every family generally had a small 4-oared boat, a similar one to the one I've got in my shed, which I'll show you shortly. The boats were used for subsistence fishing at home. Some of the smaller boats were also used for commercial fishing, and they were used for flitting livestock to the islands for summer grazing. They were also used for flitting peats, for moving peats. So round about May time, people would go and cast their peats for the winter. So there's no trees in Shetland to burn, there's no coal reserves or anything, so people went and cut peat, and you'd dry your peats and then bring them home. And it's interesting, if you look at photos from the 19th century, quite often it's women that are flitting the peats back home, which is quite an interesting observation really. I'm losing my track of thought now. So yeah, so the boats were used for flitting peats, and they'd be used for moving other cargo. They'd be used for going to the shop. They'd be used to going to the kirk on a Sunday. People got married by boat. People were, particularly here on Borough, were buried by boat. So people from Croft, which is over the other side, would be taken by boat from Croft down to Papel, where they would be buried. What else do people, obviously going to see family and friends. By the latter 19th century, boats were used for recreation as well. So racing, formalised racing began around about 1880. The first Lerwick regatta was in the late summer of 1880. And there are photographs of that first regatta. Photography had come to Shetland by that time.
And you said that people coming from down south were surprised to see women in boats in Lerwick?
Yeah, during the 19th century, Shetland was on part of the tour really. So you got gentlemen coming up from England and Scotland to visit Orkney and Shetland, and quite often they more than once commented their surprise at seeing women rowing boats. And also in Lerwick Harbour, Edward Charlton in 1832 commented that he was surprised to see women fishing for sillocks in Lerwick Harbour. Sillocks are small coalfish, basically, related to the pollock family.